Donald Trump might have expected resistance from rivals, but it's the smaller allies quietly slipping away that are catching him off guard. Developing right now, a number of countries are updating their travel advisories to the U.S. following the Trump administration's ongoing immigration crackdown and recent announcement. The U.S. is considering an updated travel ban on 43 countries. The signs are there if you look. Empty shifts at factories, contracts canceled overnight, stock charts swinging like wrecking balls. Canada's new trade alliances are quietly rewriting the rules of the game, leaving America's giants suddenly vulnerable. This isn't a headline about policy. It's the opening act of a storm that could gut entire communities. On uncertain ground, the system we thought unshakable is trembling. The only thing no one can answer yet: how close is the fall? Number 1, Caterpillar. The industrial giant watching assembly lines go dark. Factory whistles echoing across industrial valleys at dawn like calls to American productivity. Conveyor belts carrying precision-engineered components toward final assembly stations. Workers in safety gear operating machinery that transforms raw materials into the industrial equipment that builds modern civilization and defines American manufacturing excellence. Caterpillar embodies American industrial might like no other manufacturer. Their massive earth-moving equipment shapes landscapes across continents. Their construction machinery builds the infrastructure that connects nations. Their industrial engines power the equipment that extracts resources, processes materials, and constructs the foundations of modern economies. Canadian operations represent Caterpillar's largest international market by total revenue volume, $6.8 billion in annual sales through integrated distribution networks. Not just finished construction equipment, but components, replacement parts, specialized industrial services, and the technical expertise that keeps Canadian construction, mining, and infrastructure projects operational. Caterpillar's strategy was elegant in its industrial simplicity. American manufacturing expertise plus Canadian resource access plus integrated supply chains equals continental dominance in global construction and mining markets. That equation is being recalculated by industrial computers in 11 different countries with devastating precision. Germany offers precision industrial machinery that rivals Caterpillar's construction equipment through advanced engineering. Japan provides robotics technologies that could transform Canadian infrastructure projects. Sweden brings mining equipment innovations that compete directly with Caterpillar's extraction machinery. But the real threat lurks in the integration that made Caterpillar dominant across North America. Caterpillar didn't just sell construction equipment to Canada. They built interdependent production networks where Canadian facilities provided specialized components for American final assembly. While American facilities manufactured parts essential for Canadian construction projects and mining operations, that interdependence, the foundation of decades of profitable continental manufacturing, is becoming Caterpillar's single point of catastrophic failure. Canadian construction companies are receiving technology transfer proposals from German engineering firms, working through Swiss partnerships that would make them independent of American equipment suppliers. Japanese manufacturers are proposing joint ventures that would relocate heavy equipment assembly operations from American facilities to Canadian plants with better access to Asian markets and Pacific shipping routes. Internal Caterpillar strategy documents reveal the scope of corporate concern that executives are trying to hide from investors. Canadian facility integration strategies under comprehensive emergency review. Supply chain redundancy planning accelerated to crisis-level priority as partnerships threaten established relationships. The network effects cascade like industrial dominoes, falling in slow motion across American manufacturing heartland. When one link in Caterpillar's integrated manufacturing chain breaks due to Canadian partnership preferences, the entire system experiences structural stress that threatens operational viability. Suppliers who provided steel exclusively for Canadian-bound construction equipment must find new markets or close American facilities. Workers whose expertise centered on Canadian equipment specifications must retrain for different systems, or accept unemployment in communities with limited alternatives. Small towns across the American industrial belt, where Caterpillar operated major production facilities, are watching their largest employer calculate whether continued operations make financial sense. The mathematics are brutal in their industrial precision. Every lost Canadian construction contract creates ripple effects that cascade backward through Caterpillar's entire American manufacturing infrastructure. Steel suppliers in Pennsylvania see orders evaporate as Canadian projects choose European equipment. Electronics manufacturers in Ohio watch their largest industrial contracts disappear into Asian partnership networks. Component suppliers across the Midwest face potential closure as integrated production systems fragment. Manufacturing analysts call it the systematic unraveling of industrial North America that could end American dominance in global construction and mining equipment markets. Caterpillar stock has lost 19% of its value since Canada's partnership announcements, with industrial analysts predicting further declines as the scope of lost Canadian business becomes clear through quarterly reports. But the human cost extends far beyond corporate financial statements into the heart of American industrial communities. Manufacturing workers who spent decades mastering Canadian project specifications find their skills obsolete in domestic markets that cannot absorb displaced capacity. Engineers who designed integrated continental construction systems discover their knowledge has no applications in a fragmented market. Sales teams who built careers on Canadian relationships watch their professional networks become worthless as partnerships shift to other continents. This is more than industrial decline. This is the systematic dismantling of American manufacturing supremacy that took a century to build and could disappear within a decade as Canada's partnerships mature and prove their economic superiority over American alternatives. So, after everything we've seen, factories dimming, markets shifting, and supply chains fracturing, we have to ask, how close are we to the edge? If this video opened your eyes to what's unfolding, make sure to subscribe. There's more you need to know before the next domino falls, because if America loses its closest neighbor, it's not just a diplomatic failure, it's a generational. Number 2, J.P. Morgan Chase, the financial giant losing its northern vaults. As technology partnerships dissolve, financial relationships face their own reckoning. Glass towers reaching toward clouded skies like monuments to American financial power that shaped global economics. Trading floors buzzing with electronic energy that moves trillions of dollars across international markets every day. Vaults holding billions in assets that flow between nations like digital rivers of wealth controlled by American financial institutions. J.P. Morgan Chase built its continental empire on a foundation that seemed unshakable as bedrock. Money needs banks, banks need networks, and the most efficient financial networks have always run through established American relationships that dominated international commerce. Canadian operations generate $5.7 billion annually for J.P. Morgan Chase through integrated financial services. Not just traditional banking services, but investment management, corporate financing, currency exchange, and the complex financial derivatives that make international trade possible between allied economies. The bank's Canadian client directory reads like a catalog of northern economic power: mining corporations, energy companies, technology firms, agricultural exporters, businesses that needed American financial networks to access global capital markets, and international investment opportunities. That financial dependency is evaporating like morning frost under direct sunlight. Canada's new partnerships include Switzerland, a nation synonymous with banking excellence and financial innovation, plus Singapore, which offers Asian financial networks that bypass American intermediaries entirely while providing superior access to Pacific markets. But the real shock comes from an unexpected source that financial analysts never anticipated: the United Kingdom's post-Brexit banking sector, hungry for new international partnerships and offering financial services that compete directly with American alternatives through regulatory advantages. Canadian mining companies can now access London metal exchanges without J.P. Morgan Chase banking intermediaries taking percentage cuts. Energy corporations can trade in Asian markets through Singapore partnerships that offer superior terms compared to American financial networks that charge premium fees. Canadian corporate clients represent 32% of their international revenue base outside domestic markets. Losing that client portfolio doesn't just mean lost income streams that can be replaced elsewhere. It means lost economies of scale that make their entire international operation less competitive in global financial markets. Internal risk assessments paint a stark corporate picture that should concern shareholders. Canadian client retention rates declining as alternative financial networks offer competitive advantages. Currency exchange volumes decreasing 27% quarter-over as direct partnerships eliminate American intermediation. Investment management assets under comprehensive review by institutional clients exploring alternatives. But here's where the financial dominoes really accelerate beyond corporate control. J.P. Morgan Chase's continental strategy assumed Canadian businesses would always need American banks to access global markets efficiently. Their staffing decisions, their technology investments, their regulatory compliance systems, everything optimized for that fundamental assumption about financial geography. Now, Canadian pension funds are exploring direct investment partnerships with Australian superannuation funds that offer better returns. Canadian insurance companies are testing European risk management platforms that provide superior coverage options. Canadian investment firms are building relationships with Asian capital markets that completely bypass American financial intermediaries. Banking analysts call it the fragmentation of continental finance that could reshape North American economic relationships. J.P. Morgan Chase's stock performance tells the story in numbers that make institutional investors nervous. A 14% decline since Canada's partnership announcements with volatility patterns, suggesting investors cannot calculate the true scope of potential losses as partnerships mature. CEO statements emphasize confidence in long-term continental financial integration, but industry insiders note dramatically increased lobbying expenditures focused on maintaining critical financial infrastructure relationships through political pressure. The ripple effects extend beyond Wall Street into American financial communities. Investment advisors who specialized in Canadian portfolios face client losses as alternative options emerge. Currency traders who built careers on continental exchange patterns watch their expertise become less valuable. Financial analysts who understood integrated North American markets discover their knowledge applies to a world that no longer exists. But if America's largest bank is losing its grip on continental finance, imagine the devastation facing industrial manufacturers who built everything around Canadian integration. Number 3, Microsoft. The technology titan losing its digital highway. As physical supply chains crumble, digital networks face their own disconnection. Silicon Valleys gleaming under endless sunshine like monuments to American technological supremacy. Server farms humming with the digital pulse of global commerce that never sleeps. Fiber optic cables carrying humanity's conversations across continents at the speed of light. Connecting civilizations through American technological innovation. Microsoft built its continental dominance on a principle as fundamental as physics. Data flows like water, always seeking the most efficient path between digital destinations. For 2 decades, that path ran through American networks, with Microsoft providing the technological infrastructure. Microsoft's Canadian data operations handle 1.4 billion daily transactions through integrated systems. Their server facilities process Canadian banking, healthcare, and government data under international treaties that seemed as permanent and unshakable as mountain ranges. $3.1 billion in annual revenue from Canadian operations. 18 data centers strategically positioned for optimal continental coverage. 14,000 employees whose expertise revolves around managing the digital infrastructure that connects Canadian networks to global information systems through American technological intermediation. Singapore and South Korea offer advanced data processing capabilities with lower latency to Asian markets that Microsoft cannot match through geographic limitations. Switzerland provides banking data security that rivals anything American firms can offer through regulatory advantages. The United Kingdom brings artificial intelligence technologies that complement Canadian innovation in ways Microsoft never explored due to competitive focus. The real technological shock came buried in technical infrastructure specifications that few analysts initially understood. New trans-Pacific data cables are being constructed that bypass American networks entirely, creating direct digital connections between Canada and Asian markets. Internal Microsoft documents reveal the scope of the digital threat facing their Canadian operations. Alternative routing protocols decreasing American network utilization as partnerships mature. Revenue impact assessment ongoing with concerning preliminary results. But here's the deeper crisis that keeps Microsoft executives monitoring global digital traffic patterns. Microsoft's entire continental strategy assumed Canadian data would always need American networks to reach global markets efficiently. Their infrastructure investments, their hiring strategies, their research partnerships, everything built on that fundamental assumption about digital geography. Now, Canadian universities are partnering directly with Japanese artificial intelligence research centers without American technological intermediaries. Canadian banks are exploring direct connections to Swiss financial networks that offer superior security protocols. Canadian government agencies are testing data storage solutions that keep sensitive information within allied networks that specifically exclude American access. Technology analysts call it the great decoupling of continental digital infrastructure that could reshape global data flows. Microsoft stock volatility tells the story in real time with mathematical precision. The ripple effects extend beyond corporate data centers into American technological communities. Software engineers who specialized in Canadian data systems face potential obsolescence as alternative networks mature. Data center technicians across the northern border regions watch their facilities become less critical to continental operations. Technology support teams that managed integrated North American systems discover their expertise becomes less valuable as systems fragment. While digital networks disconnect, America's financial foundations face their own crisis of continental relevance. Number 4, Cargill, the agricultural giant watching harvest profits disappear. When energy supply chains fracture, food security follows. Endless fields of grain stretching to horizons that touch the sky like golden oceans of American abundance. Massive combines cutting through wheat fields under the vast dome of prairie heaven. Grain elevators towering over small towns like steel cathedrals dedicated to agricultural prosperity that built American rural communities. This is the image that constructed American agricultural dominance globally. And Cargill built a continental empire on moving that harvest northward through supply chains that seemed as reliable as seasonal weather patterns. Canada imports $2.8 billion worth of American agricultural products annually through Cargill's distribution networks. Wheat, corn, soybeans, processed foods, a river of agricultural wealth flowing across the border that separates two nations but unites their food systems. Cargill controls 31% of that agricultural flow through strategic infrastructure investments. Their grain terminals dot the Canadian border like fortresses of American agricultural power. Their processing facilities turn American harvests into products that Canadian families depend on for daily nutrition and food security. But Canada's new partnerships are about to turn that agricultural river into a drought that could devastate American farming communities. Australia and Brazil, two agricultural superpowers with production capabilities that rival American output, now have preferred access to Canadian markets through partnership agreements that prioritize their products over American alternatives. Australian wheat can now enter Canadian markets with a 16% price advantage over American grain due to preferential trade terms. Brazilian soybeans qualify for expedited processing that American products must wait weeks to receive through traditional channels that suddenly seem obsolete. But here's where the agricultural dominoes really accelerate their collapse across American farming regions. Cargill's infrastructure depends on volume consistency that assumes predictable Canadian demand. Grain elevators need constant flow to maintain profitability ratios. Processing facilities require steady supply streams to sustain operational efficiency that justifies their existence. When Canadian demand drops due to alternative suppliers, the entire system begins collapsing backward through the American agricultural heartland like a slow-motion avalanche that buries farming communities. Farmers in North Dakota, Minnesota, and Montana, states where Canadian sales represent 45 to 65% of agricultural export revenue, are watching commodity prices plummet as their largest market explores suppliers from other continents. Small towns that depend on agricultural processing are seeing their biggest employers calculate whether facilities remain economically viable with reduced Canadian demand. Cargill's quarterly report buried a devastating projection in technical corporate language designed to minimize investor panic. Anticipated volume reductions in Canadian markets may necessitate facility consolidation and workforce optimization across northern border operations. Industry analysts call it the new agricultural depression, not caused by weather disasters or crop diseases, but by diplomatic and economic drought that eliminates traditional markets. But the human cost cuts deeper than agricultural statistics can measure in corporate reports. Agricultural workers who spent careers mastering Canadian market specifications discover their expertise has no alternative applications in domestic markets. Sales representatives who built professional relationships across the border watch their client networks become worthless overnight as partnerships shift to other continents. Engineers who designed integrated continental agricultural systems find their knowledge obsolete in a world where continental integration is dissolving. The ripple effects cascade through American agricultural communities like dominoes falling across the heartland. Equipment manufacturers who specialized in Canadian specification machinery face contract cancellations. Transportation companies that developed cross-border agricultural logistics watch their primary routes disappear. Number 5. ExxonMobil, the energy titan losing its continental lifeline. While manufacturing stutters, America's energy backbone starts to crack. Oil derricks silhouetted against endless skies like monuments to American energy independence. Refineries sprawling across landscapes like industrial cities that never sleep. Pipelines stretching across continents, carrying the liquid energy that powers modern civilization and defines geopolitical strength. American energy independence has been a political rallying cry for decades, but ExxonMobil built its continental empire on a different, more profitable strategy. Energy interdependence with Canada that seemed as permanent as geological formations. ExxonMobil's Canadian operations generate $4.2 billion annually through integrated energy networks. Their pipeline systems carry Canadian crude to American refineries with efficiency that redefined continental energy logistics. Their processing facilities transform Canadian natural gas into products that heat American homes and power American industries across the heartland. It seemed like a perfect continental marriage built on mutual dependency. Canada possessed abundant energy resources. America provided advanced refinement capacity and established distribution networks that reached global markets. That marriage is filing for divorce, and the settlement could bankrupt American energy strategies. Canada's new partnerships include Norway, a nation that rivals Canada in energy exports and technological innovation, plus the United Kingdom, which offers advanced energy technologies and alternative distribution networks that bypass American infrastructure entirely. But the real shock comes from an unexpected direction that energy analysts never anticipated. Australian energy companies are offering Canada something ExxonMobil never considered true partnership instead of resource extraction dependency. While American energy companies extracted Canadian resources for processing in American facilities, Australian firms are proposing joint ventures that keep value-added processing in Canadian territory while providing direct access to Asian energy markets. Canadian crude that once flowed south through their pipeline systems is being redirected to new refineries built with Australian investment and European technology. Natural gas that powered American facilities is fueling Canadian industrial expansion, using Norwegian processing innovations that eliminate American middlemen entirely. Internal ExxonMobil projections paint a stark operational picture that should terrify energy investors. Canadian crude access reduced by estimated 43% over an 18-month period. Refinery capacity utilization dropping to 58% of optimal levels as supply sources evaporate. Pipeline revenue shortfalls requiring emergency capital restructuring to maintain system operations across multiple regions. But then the second wave of consequences hits ExxonMobil's entire pricing strategy. The energy giant's competitive advantage depended on Canadian supply stability that guaranteed consistent resource access. Without that guaranteed access to Canadian energy resources, their refineries can't compete with facilities that have secured alternative supply chains through the new partnership agreements. Stock prices have dropped 21% since Canada's partnership announcements went public. Energy market analysts call it the beginning of continental energy market fragmentation that could reshape North American energy economics for the next generation. The CEO issued a statement attempting to project confidence. We remain optimistic about long-term partnership opportunities with all continental allies. Industry insiders read the corporate communication very differently. Desperation disguised as diplomatic optimism. While the company scrambles for alternatives, the ripple effects extend beyond corporate boardrooms into American energy communities. Refinery workers in Texas face potential layoffs as Canadian crude supplies dwindle. Pipeline maintenance crews across the Midwest watch their primary revenue source redirect toward different destinations. Small towns built around energy processing facilities see their economic foundations shifting toward partnerships that exclude American participation. As energy partnerships dissolve, the agricultural foundations that feed both nations face their own existential crisis. Number 6. General Motors, the auto giant facing continental gridlock. When retail crumbles, manufacturing follows. Detroit used to mean something that echoed across continents. Assembly lines roaring with industrial symphony. Workers streaming through factory gates like rivers of American determination. The heartbeat of American manufacturing pounding out vehicles that conquered global markets and defined automotive excellence. General Motors embodied that legacy with steel and precision. Their components sit in vehicles across North America like DNA woven into the automotive bloodstream. Canadian automotive plants depend on GM's precision-engineered parts, like clockwork depends on springs that never fail. $2.1 billion in annual Canadian automotive sales. 23 manufacturing facilities optimized specifically for Canadian demand patterns. Supply chains calibrated down to the hour for just-in-time delivery across the border that separates integrated economies. Now, picture those assembly lines stuttering to a halt like machines running out of fuel. Canada's new partnerships include South Korea and Japan, two nations that manufacture automotive components with the same precision GM built its reputation on, often at lower costs, and now with preferential trade status that American companies no longer enjoy through historical relationships. The mathematics are brutal in their automotive specificity. A Canadian auto manufacturer can now source brake systems from South Korea with a 17% tariff advantage over American suppliers. Engine components from Japan arrive with regulatory fast-tracking that GM parts must navigate through slower, more expensive channels that add weeks to delivery timelines. But here's the deeper cut that threatens GM's entire continental strategy. General Motors didn't just build factories to serve Canadian sales markets. They constructed their entire North American production strategy around integrated manufacturing networks where components manufactured in Michigan get shipped to Ontario for specialized assembly, then returned to the United States as finished automotive systems. That integration, the foundation of decades of profitable continental automotive production, is about to become GM's greatest liability. Canadian facilities are already receiving serious inquiries from South Korean parts manufacturers about joint ventures that would eliminate American suppliers entirely. Japanese automotive companies are touring Canadian factories, measuring floor space, calculating shipping distances, and proposing partnerships that would reshape North American automotive supply chains. Industry insiders whisper about the Great Reshuffling, a fundamental realignment of automotive manufacturing that could leave General Motors isolated from their largest integrated production partner. Internal GM strategy documents reveal the corporate panic behind public confidence statements. Canadian facility integration strategies under comprehensive emergency review. Supply chain redundancy planning accelerated to crisis-level priority. But the ripple effects extend far beyond GM's corporate boundaries into the heart of American automotive communities. When Canadian automotive contracts disappear, The effects cascade backward through GM's entire supply network like seismic waves. Steel suppliers in Pennsylvania watch orders evaporate as Canadian production shifts to Asian partners. Rubber manufacturers in Ohio calculate facility closures as tire contracts move to Pacific suppliers. Electronics manufacturers in Texas see their largest automotive contracts disappear into alternative partnership networks. GM's CEO called an emergency board meeting last month. The agenda contained one item: strategic response to Canadian market disruption. Stock analysts call it an existential crisis, disguised as a trade dispute that could fundamentally alter American automotive manufacturing. Mall towns across the American automotive heartland, where GM operates major production facilities, are watching their largest employer calculate whether continued operations make financial sense in a world where their primary integrated partner is choosing different suppliers. If America's automotive giant is losing its grip on continental integration, what happens to the companies that feed America's energy infrastructure? Number 7. Walmart, the retail empire watching its northern kingdom crumble. The dominoes start falling with America's retail giant. Walk through Walmart's massive distribution centers that line the Canadian border, warehouses stretching beyond the horizon like industrial cities, conveyor systems that could move entire populations' worth of goods in a single day, loading docks where trucks line up like steel dominoes, waiting to carry American products into Canadian markets that seemed as reliable as sunrise. Walmart turned this cross-border infrastructure into a retail empire that redefined North American commerce. 47 distribution facilities optimized specifically for Canadian delivery routes. 18,000 employees whose paychecks depend entirely on moving American goods across that invisible line separating two nations. Annual Canadian revenue, $3.8 billion. That's not quarterly pocket change. That's the difference between growth and corporate stagnation for a company already fighting Amazon's digital dominance and changing consumer behaviors that threaten traditional retail models across every market segment. But Canada's new partnerships with 11 nations are about to rewrite the entire retail game with surgical precision. South Korean electronics manufacturers can now ship directly to Canadian retailers without American distribution networks taking their cut. Japanese consumer goods bypass Walmart's warehouses entirely through streamlined Pacific shipping routes. Australian agricultural products skip American processing facilities and transportation systems flowing directly to Canadian shelves. Walmart's competitive advantage, geographic proximity, and established infrastructure is evaporating like steam in winter air. Internal documents leaked to industry publications paint a picture that should terrify shareholders monitoring quarterly reports. Canadian market penetration down 34% in preliminary projections that assume gradual partnership implementation. Distribution center consolidation under emergency review as facility utilization rates plummet. Workforce transition scenarios being prepared for northern facilities that might not generate enough throughput to justify continued operations. This isn't corporate speculation about future market conditions that might develop over time. This is happening right now while Walmart executives calculate whether decades of infrastructure investment might become worthless overnight as Canada's partnerships mature. The company's stock volatility tells the story in real time with brutal mathematical precision. Daily swings of 7 to 9% as investors desperately try to calculate the value of a continental retail giant that might lose access to 1/3 of the continent within 18 months. Wall Street analysts whisper about fundamental restructuring scenarios that could reshape American retail geography. But here's the deeper cut that keeps Walmart executives awake at night, staring at spreadsheets that no longer make sense. When you build an entire supply chain ecosystem around one critical relationship, and that relationship fractures due to forces beyond your control, you don't just lose revenue streams that can be replaced elsewhere. You lose the machinery that generates those revenue streams. How do you retool 47 distribution centers for markets you never prepared for? How do you retrain 18,000 employees for supply chains that don't exist yet and might never exist? The mathematics are brutal in their simplicity. Every lost Canadian contract creates ripple effects that cascade backward through Walmart's entire American retail infrastructure. Like dominoes falling in slow motion, Suppliers who provided products exclusively for Canadian-bound shipments must find new markets or close operations. Trucking companies that specialized in cross-border logistics face route eliminations. Small American towns that grew around Walmart distribution hubs watch their largest employer calculate exit strategies. This is just the beginning of America's retail apocalypse. But if America's largest retailer is bleeding Canadian market share, imagine what's happening to manufacturers who built their entire production strategies around guaranteed northern access.